As Sega's Dreamcast market came to a close, they set forth to redefine their company as a multi-platform developer and publisher for pretty much every mainstream piece of hardware out there. Since Nintendo's Game Boy line was always so popular, Sega made sure to get their software started there as soon as possible. They would go on to release nearly 50 titles for the platform, a varied mix of compilations, remakes, new IPs, and even some video-based stuff. In this episode, we will be going over most of the games they were responsible for developing, publishing, or licensed out. Because there are so many, we will need to make these mini reviews short and hopefully sweet, and I'll try and steer you to the games that are most worth your time. I hope you guys enjoy Sega and the Game Boy Advance. In late 2002, we got a full-on remake of the arcade and Genesis classic, Altered Beast. I wish I could tell you that this was a good game, but it really isn't. The graphics are an awful mix of digitized and pre-rendered backgrounds and sprites, and the gameplay has seen next to no additions worth mentioning. But it's the overly long, excruciatingly boring levels that doom it. These levels go on forever, taking far too much time to get each power-up, and then only having the beast form for a short time. The only saving grace here is the two-player co-op and the decent boss encounters, but these are far too little to recommend this stinker. Sega was wise to enlist the help of Treasure when they brought Astro Boy Omega Factor to the GBA. This action shoot-'em-up beat-'em-up hybrid is A+ content start to finish. Incredible graphics with loads of cool special effects accompany the deep and fun-filled gameplay. Lots of special attacks and combos here to discover, and the plentiful boss fights feel right at home if you are a fan of Treasure's other work. This is easily one of the finest pieces of software Sega published for the platform, and it comes highly recommended. Why leave the great ChuChu Rocket on the Dreamcast when you can make it portable? And Sega did just that at the launch of the GBA in 2001. It has loads of levels, and since the original game wasn't a visual masterpiece, the GBA representation is pretty faithful. Good stuff if you like the challenge.
2, 1, 0.
Sega wasn't about to leave Columns behind, so we got a new entry into the series called Columns Crown. They gave it a story mode, but it's much the same game as it's always been. Columns was never at the top of the list of puzzle games, and this is again a middling experience with a few fun modes. Flash Columns is my favorite. The original Comix Zone was a rare win for a Sega of America produced product. It was so different, and once you adjust it to the draconian difficulty, there was an enjoyable game there. Unfortunately, the European exclusive release of it for the GBA looked different, sounded different, and played different, resulting in a lesser product that is simply not worth your time.
Well done, Turner.
Believe it or not, Crazy Taxi showed up on the GBA in 2003. You just gotta respect the testicular fortitude of everyone involved to have the guts to try and make this happen. A fully go anywhere 3D engine on the GBA. While I do admire the attempt, the gameplay of this one leaves a lot to be desired. The plodding frame rate and the eye-destroying pixelation makes it tough to stomach. It's a nice bit of curiosity, but I can't recommend it. I was stoked when Gunstar Superheroes was released in 2005. This sequel to the great Sega Genesis game had excellent graphics and gameplay similar to the original, though there are some major changes to the melee and weapon systems. Treasure typically doesn't do sequels, so this was quite the surprise back then. There are many out there that consider this a poor effort, but I can't agree. For a portable, on-the-go experience, I absolutely loved it. A lesser Treasure game is still better than most other companies' best attempts. Jet Set Radio showed up on the GBA in 2003 in the form of a top-down isometric attempt to recapture the magic of the original. It largely succeeds in regards to the gameplay. It uses a style quite similar to other games like Tony Hawk on the GBA, and the animation is top-notch. The tank-like controls take some getting used to, but the presentation is surprisingly accurate and intact overall. It's definitely worth a try. Phantasy Star Collection is a compilation of the first 3 games of the series. It was a great value in terms of gameplay and content, and at the time, there really wasn't any other way to play these games on the go in one cartridge. The ports here have been resized for the GBA display, and there have been a handful of changes to the scripts to be more accurate to the Japanese originals. A good pickup if you're a Phantasy Star fan. There were a few Puyo games on the GBA, but Puyo Pop here is the one I'll cover. You know it and either love it to death or are completely indifferent to it. Connect the Puyos and send them over to your opponent's side of the screen. Story mode and multiplayer options are available, and you can continue the Puyo fun with other games in the Puyo universe, Puyo Pop Fever, and even a Puyo with Bandai characters. In 2003, Sega Arcade Gallery combined 4 of Sega's greatest hits. Afterburner, Space Harrier, Outrun, and Super Hang-On would make an appearance in this compilation. These are not 100% accurate translations. All of them feature some form of discrepancy, be it in the visuals, speed, how it plays, or some combination of all of the above. Fortunately, these games are so well designed at their most basic level, they are still quite playable. Much better portable versions would appear in the years to come, but this one is still worth a look. In 2002, Sega Rally Championship was released on the GBA. And my god was I excited to play it. Portable Sega Rally had an instant appeal to me, and this version was to feature more tracks, more cars, and more gameplay modes. It just had to be a winner. While you again had to admire the attempt at a 3D racing engine, the visuals are just so incredibly pixelated, it's difficult to make out any real details. This impacts certain tracks more than others, with the snow track basically just being a big white pile of barely distinguishable details. The gameplay isn't bad though, and it moves along at a fair clip, so you do get a bit of thrill of rally racing. In 2002, we got Sega Smash Pack, a compilation of 3 Mega Drive classics. Here we get Echo the Dolphin, Golden Axe, and Sonic Spinball. Echo is by far the best game represented here thanks to its mostly accurate visuals and gameplay, but all these games have major issues. All of them sound awful, particularly the sound effects. Golden Axe plays funky and is missing the 2-player mode, and Sonic Spinball is just plain awful start to finish. Not so great ports to say the least. In 2004, the GBA got a remake of the first Shining Force game, now subtitled Resurrection of the Dark Dragon. Upgraded graphics and a retranslated script power this excellent remake. Great characters and an epic soundtrack are along for the ride as well. The Genesis original was a winner, but this one is better in every single way. This is as recommended as portable strategy games come. In 2002, the GBA received a brand new entry into the Shining series called Shining Soul. This is much more akin to the top-down action RPGs like Diablo. The multiplayer is quite good, but alone you are just treading ground that is much more fun with a friend. You don't get much in the way of a deep story, the characters are kinda bland, and most of the action is just wandering around and slashing enemies mindlessly. You want to love it, but unless you have a friend in tow, your time is likely better spent elsewhere. Shining Soul got a sequel in 2003, and it shares many similarities to the first, though I enjoyed the music a lot more here and the story is better. It's still much better served as a multiplayer experience, but if you enjoyed the original, there is much more hack and slash RPG action to be had here. While Sega's transition to full third-party developer and publisher had felt surreal from the beginning, it was the release of Sonic Advance that brought with it the finality of their exit from the world of console hardware. Sega's mascot was now on a Nintendo platform in a brand new exclusive adventure, and that was something long-term Sega fans thought they'd never see. But you know what? This ended up being a hell of a game. Great graphics, fantastic stage design, and multiple characters round out a Sonic adventure to remember. Many of the powers and traits from previous Sonic games are featured heavily here, and there are even multiple endings depending on your performance. A must-play for Sonic fans. With the first game selling over 1 million units, Sega got Sonic Advance 2 out the next year. Now faster and more action-focused, this one sought to make Sonic a much more twitch-focused game as opposed to an action platformer. Stages are huge and built for speed. Set pieces are all over the place to either help you keep your momentum or stop you dead in your tracks. It still has multiple characters to play as, but all but Sonic need to be unlocked. Of course, with Sonic Advance 2 selling well, Sega got out Part 3 in 2004. Containing most of the elements that made the first 2 Sonic Adventure games fun and exciting, this one began to wear out its welcome quite a bit. 3 straight games in a row, year after year, Sega was just draining that well dry every chance they could. I mean, unless you knew these games extremely well, you could put all 3 side by side and have a hard time telling them apart. Even the Genesis games evolved visually over time. Don't get me wrong, this is far, and I mean far from a bad game. It's just that it's mostly the same game we'd already seen twice before. Sonic Battle is a top-down arena-based fighting game featuring the characters from the Sonic universe. In regards to the Sonic games, it's as different as they come. I'm not a big fan of the gameplay here though. It feels imprecise and is difficult to connect the attacks you want when you want. It does have a deep story and a bunch of minigames though, making the variety alone worth exploring. Some of you will hate it, but I think some of you will love it too. Give it a try for something very different. In 2003, Sega released a Sonic-themed pinball game called Sonic Pinball Party. Sonic and Knights themed tables are selectable, and the gameplay is really solid for a portable pinball game. This isn't going to dethrone the more accurate offerings of today, but for a fun Sega-themed portable game, I can't fault it too much. Definitely worth a play or two for fans of both Sonic and pinball games. Sometimes things go wrong with a game, and man was that true with 2006's Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis. Every single thing about this port is broken. The game runs terrible, the gameplay is completely busted, the sound effects and music are in shambles. I mean, start to finish, this game is an utter embarrassment to Sega's name. I mean, surely someone with responsibility at Sega had to see or play this travesty and know it was completely wrong. I understand the fine line between profitability and failure, but reputation is by far your most important attribute. Sega really dropped the ball with this pitiful effort. In 2003, Sega released Space Channel 5, Ulala's Cosmic Attack. Never been a fan of this series and have no clue what the hell is going on in any of them. Some chick is dancing, aliens are everywhere, and that's about as far as I can stomach it. Not for me, but if you are a fan of the fully featured versions, there may be something here for you. I was so happy when Super Monkey Ball Jr. showed up in 2002. Very similar to the games on much more powerful hardware, you just had to love the 3D perspective and gameplay here. Of course it was much uglier and was much more difficult to play with a D-pad, but even so, this was a great portable experience. It even had some of the mini games to keep you going. In 2002, Sega did the Pinball of the Dead, an homage to its classic House of the Dead series. Here you get boards, sound effects, and even video inspired from Sega's great light gun arcade games. It's zombies and pinball, what more could you possibly ask for? When Revenge of Shinobi dropped for the GBA, I was there day freaking one. As a fan of the original, I envisioned a better looking, better sounding, and better playing version of the Sega Genesis classic. It was done by the same company that did the Altered Beast remake, 3D6 Games, and again they took a big old wet shite right in the middle of the bed. Awful pre-rendered graphics, awkward animations, and disjointed gameplay mars any chance of this being a great experience. I love how this dude is supposed to be a ninja, yet his thunderous footsteps can be heard a mile away. The music captures none of the magic of the original, and the attempt to add exploration only draws out levels that are no fun to play to begin with. This is not Revenge of Shinobi, and Sega should be ashamed putting the name on such an inferior product. Boy, did 2002's Virtua Tennis surprise me. This game looks and plays as good as you could have hoped for a GBA sports title. The gameplay is nailed here and is nothing short of spectacular. The Williams sisters are playable, as is a full roster of male and female fictional characters to choose from. Multiple court locations, excellent animation, and great multiplayer round out this excellent title. It's the kind of sports game that transcends its age and is still very much playable today. Sega's run on the GBA was filled with some real winners and unfortunately some real dogs. While I covered most of their games here, there were other releases as well. They had a number of combo cartridges that had a couple of different games on them. They also had some sports management games that were only released in Japan. They dabbled into licensed games a bit and even released some full motion video cartridges of the Sonic animated series. They really did try and run the gamut across many different styles of games, so I've always respected their efforts. The majority of the software Sega was involved with for the GBA were farmed out to other companies to develop and publish. THQ played a big role in bringing out many of the GBA games to the US, for instance. I also want to impress upon you the incredible volume of software here that used the GBA game link cable for multiplayer. Many of these games had 2 to 4 player modes that really spruced up the fun factor and sometimes made a massive difference in the experience. Shining Soul alone was nowhere near as good as Shining Soul with Friends. Sega supported the platform for over 5 years, well after even the Nintendo DS was launched. There are some great GBA emulators out there if you want to give these games a go, and most of them play solid on a DS and DS Lite. If I had to pinpoint just a few that are must-plays, hit up that first Sonic Advance game, the Shining Force remake, and be sure to give Astro Boy a go. They are easily some of the finest games on the platform. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.